Welcome to the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lyons. I'm a 6-time author and book editor, and I help people write and publish powerful, thought-provoking, wildly entertaining books without any more overthinking, second-guessing, or overwhelm than absolutely necessary. Because let's face it, some overthinking, second-guessing, and overwhelm is going to come with the territory if you're anything like me. I believe that story and shared perspective are two of the most potent ways we connect with one another, and that your story, perspective, and insights are destined to become someone else's favorite resource or pastime. For more book writing and publishing tips and solutions, and plenty of free and low-cost resources, visit publishaprofitablebook.com. And for recommendations of fabulous books you've possibly never heard of, book writing inspiration, and the occasional meme so relatable you'll wonder if it was created with you in mind, follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth Lyons Author. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this next episode of Write the Damn Book Already. This week, I got to interview Pamela Kripke, whose novel, At the Seams, is based on actual events that have occurred in her life. And it was really fun, of course, to talk to her about her writing process. She might be one of the first people I've spoken with who is admittedly able to edit as she writes. So one of the things that she shares in the interview is that it's just part of her process. She's got to feel good about a sentence before moving on to the next sentence, which I was fascinated with because I can't do that. I've not talked to a single other person who can do that. If we allowed ourselves to do that, or if we encouraged ourselves to do that, we would stay stuck on that sentence in perpetuity. So it was amazing to get her alternate perspective, as it always is, because there is no right or wrong in this game, if you want to call it, this adventure, this creative adventure, other than doing something that doesn't work for you. That will always end up being the wrong, see the air quotes, thing. But before we launch into the interview, I want to make sure to mention next week's workshop. It's turning out to be what might be the most popular one yet in terms of signups, and it's on how to start a podcast. I knew this would be popular because I know so many of you have a desire to start a podcast, but I didn't know how popular it would be. Of course, because we never know these things before we do them, post them, say them, or otherwise put them out into the world. But in all likelihood, if you have thought of starting a podcast and it sounded fun to you and you haven't yet started it, the reason is you are overwhelming yourself unnecessarily with a lot of the little details. And I get it because I did the exact same thing. Having now started and am still running one, but having started 4 podcasts over the last, I'd say 5 years, I have learned a thing or 2 or 11 about podcasting. And most of it boils down to how we overcomplicate the process as opposed to just making it simple and fun and doing it and seeing where it goes. There are a few things that I have learned I would absolutely recommend that people do right from the start. They are not expensive things. They are simple things. They are both simple and easy. God bless. And I'm, of course, going to lay those out for you. I'm not leaving anything out of this workshop. It could very easily be like a full-blown masterclass in starting a podcast. The goal here is that you will be able to leave it and the next day start the podcast. I mean, almost seriously. We're going to cover things like how to identify a podcast focus, one you can actually stick with, the fastest way to come up with a compelling podcast title, brand, and logo, 5 creative ways to keep your podcast interesting, effective episode planning strategies, whether you're a newbie or an experienced interviewer. We'll chat about the ideal frequency for releasing podcasts, exactly what recording equipment you need. In fact, I'm going to flat out give you the links to all of the equipment I use. I was shocked at how inexpensive and high quality it was. You don't need the $200 mic. We're going to talk about audio quality. We're going to talk about editing. Keep in mind, right now, I'm a one-woman show over here. And over the years, so many coaches, mentors, gurus, experts, whatever you want to call them, have said, you can't do that. You have to outsource the editing. You have to outsource the show notes. You have to do this, that, or the other thing. And for a variety of reasons, I chose not to. And I actually now continue to choose not to. Now, that does not mean there is anything wrong with hiring that out or having someone do it for you or turning it over to an assistant. And maybe I am. Maybe I'll look back at some point and go, gosh, I should have turned this over sooner. But the fact is, I do it all myself, and it does not take up days of my time. So I will share with you exactly how I edit, how I get my audio quality to be what it is, how to create an effective intro and outro, finding music that you can use that you won't get sued for if you just watch the documentary, I think it was a CNN documentary on Taylor Swift being sued for lyric appropriation or something. I just spend too much time on Netflix, so there's that. The distribution platforms I use, creative ways to monetize your podcast, even if you only have 2 listeners and it's yourself and your mom. We're going to cover all of it. So the podcast is November 16th. It's a Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's when I will be hosting it live. Everyone who registers will receive a replay. So even if you cannot attend live, I highly encourage you to sign up, especially because it's pay what you can. I want to make these workshops accessible to everyone. So it's pay what you can, starting at just $10. You can grab your spot through the link in the show notes or in my Instagram bio. It is the 5th, that's number 5 link in the bio. It's very clearly stated, podcasting workshop. Get yourself signed up. Again, it's next week. This is like the starter pack for starting a podcast without overwhelm, without overthinking, without overing in any way. And if you're listening to this episode after the 16th, all of the workshops that I have hosted, replays are available for purchase on the website. Visit publishaprofitablebook.com, and they are either available on the all programs page or the workshops page. I think we're about to create a workshops page, so that'll keep all the workshops separate. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's hop into this amazing interview with Pamela Kripke. I'm so curious. First, I have a lot of curiosities when it comes to this book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm not giving anything away by saying, because it's on the back cover, by saying that when Kate's understanding of her world is shattered when she learns of an uncle who died inexplicably in the hospital just days after his birth. What I'm curious about is what gave you the idea to want to keep taking it further?
Okay. Well, this story is in truth from my family's experience. Right. So my mom really had this older brother, and she really told me at some very young age, and I just determined 8. And so it has always sat with me. And the interesting thing to me and how I got the idea was I wasn't obsessed like Kate. It was just something in her. It was something in our family consciousness. We knew it happened. Mom's an only child, and it sat with us. And it wasn't at the forefront of my thinking as a kid. I have babies. I have a divorce. My babies go off, and that scene in the driveway when they leave for the very first time, and my daughter becomes hysterical, sets me thinking about the baby. And I wound up writing a piece for the Huffington Post about it. And then during the pandemic, I thought, there's more to it. I could turn it into a memoir. And so what I did was I went back and looked at the date of when this all happened, when I first had the idea, before it was published in the Huffington Post. And it was that moment. And I didn't realize at the time I started thinking about it, that it was when they left for the first time. And it was a horror, to see your little kid driving around hysterical. And that's when it struck me. So I thought, why am I thinking about that now? What subliminally goes on with stuff like this? So I thought to sort of exaggerate the character, make her really crazed about this, extra curious, extra. And so that's what happened. Yeah.
So that kind of answers my next question, which was, you decided to make this memoir, but fiction. So a novel based on a true event, but then, and is that why? Because then you got to have some fun and kind of.
Well, at first, I got only so far with the research. And because it happened in the 1930s and the hospital's no longer in existence, it changed hands. There's no one left to interview. And my grandparents are gone. My mother knew nothing about it. There was really, and the relatives were really, there may have been one or two left. So there was really no place to go. So I spent a lot of time researching. And when I got no farther, I thought, well, let's just make that stuff up that I don't know about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot for different reasons. Sometimes it's a lack of information. Sometimes, people don't want to tell the exact thing that happened to them, or they want to concoct the ending that they wish had happened, whatever it is. But I always find that so fascinating when it's fiction, but it's based on an actual experience or a portion of a true story. I think that's what was your writing process? Can you talk a little bit about your process of taking this idea from an article for HuffPost, and then how did you build that out? And
Right. So at first I thought, well, I wasn't really sure whose story it was. At first I thought maybe it's the grandmother's story. But then so I thought, well, I'm going to have 3 sections. And the first one's going to be grandmother. Second one's going to be, and with her name. Part 2 is going to be Eva, the mother, and part 3 is going to be Kate. But as I started writing, I realized that it's all about Kate, because Kate is the recipient of the generations before her, and her. Yeah. And so the grandmother is the way she is because of the experience. And then the mother is the way she is because of her mother's treatment of her because of the experience.
Right.
And then the little girl gets both of those generations, but she doesn't connect the two because she can't or doesn't know it until she's older. Yes. And so it made sense to sort of do it chronologically for Kate's life. And so break her life up into little kid hearing about it.
Okay.
Teenager, what do I do about it? Conflict. And then as a grown-up, actually researching.
Well, and that adds a question I had, because, you divided it into 3 parts, and it's clear there's a leap, right? So between part 1 and part 2, there's a pretty big leap in her age between the 2, and then again between 2 and 3. So what was your thought? Are you a plotter or a pantser or what do they call them? A plotzer or a plantser?
Well, I'm typically not, as a journalist, you're used to writing short pieces. So, I like autopilot, everything comes out to be 1,500 words. Whatever I do is 1,500 words. So I thought, well, how do I break it down, and how do I figure out how to expand it? For me, it was about expanding. So I wound up making like a storyboard with Post-it notes. And I made, yellow ones for part 1. And I got this it was during the pandemic, and we had all these boxes. And so I flattened out a big box, and I made this huge box, and I put yellow ones across for the, first part, pink ones and blue ones and so I would, move them around on the board. And it made, once I figured out, it made sense, and it was easy to sort of just go. And and it was also, what do I leave out? And there's the gap between when she's a teenager and then a grown up, where she's off in college. Kids don't really think about this stuff when they're in college. So I wanted to get to, at that point, it felt like we needed to, what's going to happen with this story. So I jumped from 2 to 3 like that. Yeah.
Are you what you would consider a layer writer? What I mean by that is, how in the details, there are a couple lines that I had marked. Some of these lines are so detailed. Well, this one I marked for a different reason, but and I'm often curious, if not always curious, with authors, when there's that level of detail, does that come out of you the first time through, or is that something that you go back and add in? Are you like a skeleton writer where you're kind of getting the core out first? You're shaking your head. Okay.
Yeah, it comes out like that.
Really?
And it comes out like that. And I like to write a sentence and be happy with the sentence before I move on to the next, because the rhythm of one affects the rhythm of the next, which affects the next. So when I go back on a sentence level, there's very little editing.
Okay.
Because I do it as I go, but there's structural editing or maybe organizational editing or maybe insert a scene here or, move this scene there. But on a sentence level, they're compact.
Wow.
It's just, people always ask me that. And I go to readings and they always say, it's so detailed. How do you remember, first of all? Or do you create those details or are you remembering them, from something real? But no, I write them out. They come out.
Do you think that's the journalist in you?
I think it's the journalist in me. I also think it's the me in me. And in second grade, I think it's why I became a journalist. In second grade, my mom tells the story where we had an assignment in second grade. Mrs. Roman had us write news every day in class. We'd come in, take out a piece of paper, write news at the top, and every kid would write 3 sentences. And apparently I wrote a lot of pages. And so...
Really?
So it was, it's like not, I had, I played the piano last night. I played the fugue by Haydn and, for 14 and a half minutes. And then after that, so it was on and on. So I think my brain is really photographic and it just notices details a lot.
That's fascinating to me because I've worked with a couple journalists actually, and I've had to encourage them. In fact, one of my most frequent encouragements is not to need the sentence to be perfect before you go to the next sentence, because I swear people will only write one sentence if that is their mindset. So I love that you are able to just honor that this is this is your process.
Yes.
How do you keep it from getting you stuck though?
Yeah, it feels comfortable to do that. And it feels uncomfortable if I move on and it stays with me and it even becomes a little bit distracting. So I just know that this happens and I know that it doesn't take me long. The writing part is smooth and goes. I don't really struggle with writing sentences at all. And so I struggle with the big idea more, but on the sentence level, I could, not a problem, Okay. So I know that about myself.
So once you know where you want it to go, it's the process of figuring out where, like, what's the overall structure.
Yeah, sometimes that. Yeah. But once I decide and I know, well, I'm going to start the chapter here and end here, and I'm going to weave through this, I know I have a plan, I could do it. All the details just come out in the writing. They just come out as you tell the story.
Because is it because you see it that way too? Like, do you see it playing out in your brain?
I see it. Yeah, I see the picture of it. And a lot of it too is, does it make sense? Okay, she's driving down the street in the bike and the bush is on the right. Does it make sense that she's hearing something from the left? I mean, it's all very analytical like that too.
That is, So there's one line that I underlined because it made me laugh out loud actually. And my question was, and now I know the answer, I think, but did this whole line come to you at the time or did you go back later and finesse it? And the line, is it okay if I share a line?
Sure, of course.
He was 77 and rarely had a sniffle, but chest discomfort is one of those fickle symptoms. You could have eaten too much shredded wheat or you could be dead in an hour. And I don't know why that made me laugh, but it did. It just felt kind of like this dry humor. Is that just how your brain, did that just come out that way the first time?
Yes. And it's interesting because sometimes I'll say to myself, I need something that sounds like that here. And if it doesn't come out, I say, you know what? It's not going there. If it's not a natural, I'm going to say it in a different way. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think what you said about trusting yourself and trusting the process, I never thought of it that way, but I think that's what it is.
I mean, every writer has to fit. I think that when we're starting, part of the first book for everyone, right? And so like I'm working on I've written nonfiction all these years. I'm working on my first novel, completely different beast. So I know what my process is for nonfiction. Like I figured that out. Fiction, that's what this book is for me in many ways, is figuring out what is my process. So I'm asking a lot of other novelists, what's your process? How do you do this? Not because I'm looking for the right way, but I'm looking for different options. Because I'm waiting for that thing to click, and it's starting to click, thank God, because it's getting exhausted. But one thing about books I love so much is I swear it doesn't matter what book I read or who wrote it or what time period it's in, there will be something in that book that I connect with in a very, I don't believe in coincidence. So it'll be in a very sort of bizarre, wow way. And the one thing, and not that there was only one, but the one I will not forget about this book was the description of going to the fabric store. And I think I DM'd you about this. Like it was very weird, Pamela, because I read this section and then as though the internet could read my mind, which maybe it can now, it served me up somebody's post with a picture of the pattern, right? But and it took me back. I mean, my mom used to sew. Her mom used to sew everything for her and her two sisters. And then when I was growing up, my mom sewed a lot, like bathing suits. My mom made me a bathing suit.
Wow.
And it's so interesting because I remember going to Joann Fabrics and sitting on the round stool that spun up at the metal table and getting the big books and opening them. And we were looking for dresses. Like my mom made my dress that I wore in some 6th grade or event at school. She made my dress. I mean, these were times when that actually was far more economical.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
Yes.
Because the amount of time, but your description of that was, I don't know how it would land with someone who had never been through that, but it was like I was reliving in my mind's eye that whole thing.
It's such a specific place that the patterns in the fabric store, you can't really think of something that's comparable even. It's so itself. It's so specific that it really, it stays, those kinds of places really stay with you in your mind, I think, and in your experience.
And I don't know why. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like
well, I think, I think, well, for me anyway, I think my mom sewed me lots of stuff and we would create things. And if there was a need for something, we would dream something up. And so it was, a shared experience. So it was, and it was creative and we connected that way creatively. And so it was fun. And when you're a little kid, it's fascinating to see this flat bolt of fabric turn into something three-dimensional that you put on your body. And so I think there's pride tied up in it, and there's fascination tied up, and then just like little kids like to make things. So there's that, and your mother is like, she turns into some kind of wizard, being able to do this.
I mean, I can still hear the whirring sound of the sewing machine. As she would just fly through these things.
Yes.
You just hit on something that I hadn't thought about, but I think there is a creativity that maybe I was trying to force upon myself because I've always been a creative person, but I don't know that I ever wanted to actually sew clothes. I tried, but I think I was too impatient. I got frustrated. It took too long. It was like, it's been 2 hours. Why don't I have a frock by now? Like what's going on? But the act of picking one and then of going through all those bolts of fabric.
Yes. Yeah.
All those options and fascinating. Okay. So publishing process.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. What did you decide to do in terms of how to publish and why was that your choice?
Yeah. So I shopped it around with some agents. And at the same time, right before I began writing the story, I started writing short stories, which I hadn't done before. And so, and I had a bunch published in different literary magazines. And that sort of opened my eyes to the world of small presses. So, I started reading about short stories and reading about, literary publications, and then reading, poets and writers. And then I learned all about this world of small press publishing.
Right.
And the book seemed to me to fit that kind of place. And so I sent it out, and the first one who raised his hand, I said, okay. And and it was nice to it was very, very collaborative and very hands-on and personal, and it felt easy and kind and
I love that.
Yeah, and it went smoothly, and so I was really happy with that. Yeah.
I love to hear that, and I think there's so many. Can I ask? Was it an author financed?
No.
No. Okay.
No, it's just traditional small press.
But a small press. Okay. I'm loving it. There's so many options out there now, from author finance to boutique presses that do smaller advances, or that don't do advances, but that split the profits in a different way, and they're involved after the fact. The key word that makes my heart happy is partnership. Right? Like feeling like you're not just a number, and feeling like your worth isn't determined by how many books you sell and how quickly, and really feeling like your publisher, no matter which option it is. And this does happen sometimes in the traditional world too, which is wonderful. I mean, the big five traditional world, feeling like they believe, not just because they think they can make money off of it, but because they genuinely believe in the story and in you.
Right. And that was the feeling that I got from these people. It wasn't, it's a business. So of course they want to make money, but it was, you know what, whatever you write, you have a home here with us. So that, and that will change the way you sit down and write, is what they said to me. You write with a different kind of freedom, knowing that there's a place for you to publish the book. So it was interesting. They when I first pitched the book to them, it had a different title, and it was called Baby Goldman. And after a bit, after we got through a few weeks, months in, they said, would you consider a different title, something having to do with the pattern making and with the dressmaking, and that's sort of the it carries the the narrative through, and we also think that it might appeal to more people. There may be people who do not want to read about a quote unquote baby, so and then it makes it more about the incident with the baby, which really is just the inciting incident. It's really just the thing that kicks off. It's really more the response to it that creates this behavior that then, it's all about family secrets and how you really shouldn't have them. You really should just deal with it and
get it all out there. Right.
Well, yeah. So
I love the new title.
Yes. And so I said to them, you know what? That's a great idea. So I said, what do we do? And I said, come up with a few titles, having to do, and we'll bat them around and see. And then I remember that, Kelly, she wrote me a note and said, no one agrees to change the title. I'm so excited you did. And apparently a lot of authors get stuck. They see it a different way. And I guess you have it in your head while you're doing all the work. Yeah. And I thought, they're the experts. They know. And if they think this will get the book in more hands, absolutely. So I was pleased. I was pleased with it. Yeah.
I think it's just that outside perspective too. As the author, we're tunnel vision. And we sometimes forget that the reader, we know the whole story. The reader doesn't know any of it. Right. And so what will compel the reader to, like in the example of Baby Goldman, that's also so emotional for you because it's true, right? So people hold on to their truth, and there's a fear about letting it go. But sometimes, there is just a better a better way. And I think this one was really good. And I love when I shared the cover on Instagram, so many people commented that they loved the cover, the thread. And I too, it's such a great metaphor because it's like the thread, what's the thread, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought at the seams, we think of coming apart at the seams is just sort of the idiom that goes along with that. Without saying it, it kind of is implied. And that's sort of what happened with the character. So, so I was pleased with that. I thought it was smart on their part. Yeah.
Agreed.
So when they did that, then as a writer working with this publisher, you feel more secure in it. You feel yeah. So I like the way they handled it. I like the way we came up with it together. It was a good, positive partnership.
Yeah, I think that partnership piece is what's, I hope, continuing to increase in the publishing space. I think more and more authors are not only craving it, but borderline demanding it. There are other choices now beyond the big five. Even in the traditional world, there are more what I call boutique traditional publishers. So just, smaller, more intimate, more partnership driven. It's just about more than the bottom line, which I think is lovely. So what were your what did you not expect, good or bad, and I don't mean bad, but what surprised you about whether it was the writing process, the publishing process?
I think it came out pretty quickly. So there wasn't there. That was a little bit of a surprise. So there wasn't a lot of lead time to do advanced, promotional stuff.
The book was released pretty quickly.
It was released earlier than I had expected.
Okay,
and so so it was a little bit of playing catch up promotionally, but which was fine. I guess all writers, don't realize that they turn into business people as soon as they have a book. I tell my friends, I'm now a peddler.
It's like for me in your local grocery store, supermarket, I'm the one with my trunk open. Right.
Exactly. Journalist, author, merchant,
peddler.
right. And
how does that work for you?
It's a little, that part is a little weird,
Yeah.
I've worked my whole life, on my own. I've freelanced a lot. Most of my career, I've been a freelancer so I could stay home with my kids when they were little, and then pick them up from school at 3:15 when they got older, because I was, a single mom for, all of their growing up. And so I made the conscious decision to be at home. And so writing is, it's an isolated pursuit, and I go out on stories, interact with people that way. So getting in front of people and talking up your work is a funny, peculiar kind of experience. Though it's funny, I did a book festival this past weekend.
Right.
And I brought my 27-year-old daughter with me. I said, Daphne, you must come. I don't think I can do this on my own. So you're going to man communications. So she figured out, she got all the people's Venmo and everything like that. And I said, take pictures of me talking with the people. And as the day went on, you get good at talking to the people, and you engage them on a level that is just a nice conversation. So I actually enjoy that part of it. I like meeting people who are interested in reading books and asking them about their experiences. And they all told me a story about a family secret in their family,
really?
Yes.
Yes. Well, so, I find that's the part of sort of the promotion that authors enjoy is, again, community, because writing is such an isolated pursuit, and many of us are fine with that. Like, I don't need to be around people all day, every day until I do. I have these little moments where I'm like, I miss people. And so being out and being able to talk to people and hear their stories. And of course, hear about either their interest in your book or having enjoyed your book, or now they want to read your book. That's lovely. Where I get tripped up and where a lot of other people get tripped up is in the cash exchange. Now, there are a million people out there who would be like, well, Elizabeth, you have a money mindset issue. And I'd say you're absolutely correct. So my solution for that is exactly what you did. I love having someone else there who's manning the money. Like, I can just go, thank you so much for your support.
Right.
Go over there.
Right. I think writers are not the best business people. There have been times in my career where I've on the phone with an editor and they assign me a piece and I hang up and I say to myself, oops, I forgot to ask what the fee is. So it just doesn't go together. We're just happy to have the assignment. We're happy to write. I've learned that we need to know our worth and advocate for it. But that took a little time. It took a little time to realize. So,
do you feel like that's part of? I feel like. And so I'm asking you if you do, that's part of the growing process for me is like, it's a, what do they say? A leading edge, or it's an edge to lead. I forget what all the verbiage is, but it's an edge of growth, to kind of lean into, where I do believe that authors are entrepreneurs, whether you're traditionally published or not, you've got that unless you don't care if you ever sell a book ever, in which case, maybe you don't care about the money, but why would you write a book otherwise you're just journaling. So why would you write a book that you don't want other people to read, even if there's no money exchanging hands, even if you just won the Powerball last night and, money is not necessary. But I think authors get to decide to what degree they want to be entrepreneurial. So I'm not a person who says, well, you have to do XYZ. What are you most enjoying when it comes to the promotion of it?
Yeah. Well, I've tried to do a bunch of different things just to see what they're all like. So I've done just signings. I've done some author talks. I have one next week at a little bookstore. I did one at my hometown library where I grew up, which was really fun.
Yeah.
And what else? I'm doing an author panel discussion in November. I'm doing an online talk and question, and doing another library visit. What else? And podcasts.
Podcasts, obviously. Yeah.
And so I tried them all. It's fun and it's an adventure. It's all new.
Right.
I've been interviewed in the past for articles I've written. So sure. I've been done radio interviews and I've done like newspaper interviews, that sort of stuff. So I'm comfortable with that. I mean, there's a couple of articles, one in my hometown newspaper, another in the newspaper where the book was set out in New York. So I'm comfortable with that. But yeah, I've tried all of the avenues. And
is there anything that you didn't think you'd like that you've ended up pleasantly surprised by enjoying?
Yes. I get nervous speaking in front of groups, and so I expected to not enjoy that or to feel trepidation beforehand, but I haven't.
So full on expect to pass out, and then if I don't, I'm pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been again peculiar.
Yeah.
That I
right.
That I remained conscious and could answer questions and didn't feel like my voice was coming out of 3 miles away underwater.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm confident that there are a number of journalists, freelance writers listening. What has your experience been in terms of the difference? Because I think there's this, it's not weird, but I put air quotes around the word weird. There's a weird assumption that if you write and have been writing for a long time, it should be a natural transition to writing a book, to promoting a book. And I think so more often than not, folks who are journalists, freelance writers, short story writers, they're surprised by the resistance they feel either to the writing and or to the promotion. because maybe they're great at talking up the articles that they've written about other people, but now they're being asked to talk about their own stuff.
Yeah. I think that the transition from journalism to, well, for me, it's been interesting because within journalism, we all start out in breaking news, and then once you master that, you're asked to write features, and then as a freelancer, that's all you write are feature stories, and for me, I started writing essays, personal essays, and the first one I wrote was when I first started freelancing. I was living in Chicago, and the first essay I ever wrote and submitted wound up on the op-ed page of the Chicago Tribune. And I thought, wow, I like this. I like this format. I like really writing what I think, which we're not allowed to do as journalists. So I sort of got the essay bug a long time ago, and I wound up writing a lot of essays, and then I was syndicated in the 2000s. And so for me, the essay writing was sort of the natural segue into fiction because there were storytelling, so I wound up writing my favorite stories wound up in the opinion section of the New York Times when they had this wonderful section called Opinionator, and they had this column about animals and the human-animal bond. So I wrote all about frogs and squirrels and dogs. And so it was at that time that I thought, these essays sound like they could be stories. So for me, it was a natural evolution into short stories. And then from the short stories, I thought, okay, now we can
transition into the longer version.
Yes. Wow. And I actually wrote a memoir when in 2018. Mm-hmm. I had been living in Texas for 17 years and moved back home to New York. And I wrote a memoir about coming back, and I just self-published it. I didn't without knowing anything about self-publishing, without knowing anything about traditional publishing. I just wanted it out there. And so once I did that and I saw this 150-page thing that I wrote, I thought, okay, where do we go from here? And so when I look back and trace it, it's sort of a natural pathway to where I am now. So it wasn't from A to Z.
It never is.
And it never is.
I feel like it never is.
Right.
Okay, last question. I've been trying to remember to ask everyone this. What are you reading now?
What am I reading now?
Yes. Or listening to, if you're an audio book person.
Yeah. No, I'm reading a collection of short stories by an author named Joe Dornich, Dornich. And it's so strange. I have the book by my nightstand. I always forget the name of this book.
I'll look it up and I'll link it in the show notes, because the reason I asked this question, inevitably, up until now, I don't think anyone has answered with a book I've heard of.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I love it so much because, my bank account doesn't love it, but I just, if someone recommend, it's in the stack.
Yeah.
And so there's always someone new and something new to discover.
Right. And it's great. It's great because, in the press, you get tired of seeing the same recommendations. Right. So it's nice that people are actually reading other things. And I'm reading it. I'm writing a story collection next. So I'm reading a lot of stories. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining. I'll put all of your links in the episode notes for everybody, and the link to Joe Dornich's short stories so everyone can find that too. Thank you. And please let me know when the next one comes out.
I sure will. Thank you so much. It's so nice to meet you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, this is your friendly reminder to follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share it with someone you know has a great story or message, but isn't sure what to do next. Also, remember to check out publishaprofitablebook.com for book writing resources and tips, and to see all the ways we can work together to get your book out into the world. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon.